Hello everybody, welcome back to the last video in our series on NumPy. In this video we're going to talk about raising errors, and what I mean by this is we're going to edit our toBin function so that it raises an error if our input is not a NumPy array and also if any entry in the array is not 0 or 1. So I'm going to start by copy pasting the toBin function from our first video. So I have it here. I already have NumPy imported, but be sure to do that if you need to. But otherwise, all right, here's our function. And I also already have ARR defined as this random NumPy array from above. So be sure to check out the previous two videos if you haven't yet. So let's just take a look at ARR again. Here it is. And let's say I wanted to see, well, what's the type of ARR? So again, we want to raise an error. The first part is if our input is not a NumPy array. So if we look at the type, we see it's an n-dimensional NumPy array. Now you might be tempted to say, okay, the way I can check that the input is this type is I do double equals and then type numpy.nd array. In practice, you will never see that. There's actually something called isInstance, and this is the preferred method. Speaking very loosely, the reason why we use this over checking with double equals is that we don't care so much if ARR is exactly a NumPy n-dimensional array. It could be something built off of it, and we would still want to include that. Again, speaking very loosely, if you take away anything, just let it be that if you're checking the type, you should use isInstance. And the way it works is we're going to pass ARR, and then we pass what type we're checking against. So here I'm going to say numpy.nd array. And let's see here, oops, I should have NP. So this is saying true, so that's good. We could do something like isInstance. Now let's have list of ARR0 just to practice. So okay, that should be a list. We're saying is a list a NumPy n-dimensional array. This should return false, and indeed it does. So what we're going to do is let's go back to our function. Now, okay, we want to raise an error if we do not have an instance of this n-dimensional array. So I'm going to say if not isInstance of ARR, np.nd array. What do we want to do? Well, the way we're going to do this is you type the word raise, and then there's all different types of errors. This is called a type error, so you do type and then error. You can look up the different types of errors, but this is a type error because we have a wrong type. And then you can type the error message that you want it to read off. So I can say here, input should be a NumPy array. All right, so running that, let's now try with some examples. So if I do toBin of ARR, so this looks good, this runs as we expect, but now let's try with something else. So I could say toBin, let's say I pass it a list, like 1, 2, 3, oops. Notice here we get type error, and it's pointing to the line where this error was raised, and it's saying input should be a NumPy array. So that's the error message that we wrote up here. So that takes care of the first half of this problem. Remember, we said we want it to raise an error if the input is not a NumPy array. The next thing we need to do is check whether every entry is 0 or 1. So let's do some testing down here, and then we'll go back and edit our function. So, okay, one thing I could do is I could say ARR. I could ask, is this equal to 0? And it returns false everywhere it's not 0 and true everywhere that it is. So we also want to check, is it equal to 1? So same thing, but now it's true where it's equal to 1 and false everywhere else. So one thing I could do is I could say, well, ARR, is it equal to, let's start with 0, or is it equal to 1? Oops, and what's wrong here? I need the double equals, right? So notice here, because this was our valid array, it returns true everywhere. So remember, when we're passing it to our function, we want every single entry to be true. So I can say .all, and notice that this gives true. So what I want to do when I go back to the function is, okay, so we have our first error. Now I want to say if. Now, okay, we're happy if this happens. So if all of the entries are 0 or 1, so I'm going to say if not, and you might be worried, why am I using not here instead of tilde? The reason is that we're dealing purely with Boolean values, what we're checking. So what's returned here is either true or false. So for that reason, we can just use base Python. But okay, we're saying if not all of the entries are 0 or 1, what do we want to happen? Then what we want to do is raise what's called a type error, or not type error, sorry, value error, because the issue is with the value of the element. And we can say here, input should be a numpy, or sorry, all entries should be 0 or 1. My brain went into autopilot just reading this line. Good. Now let's test it with a couple examples. So notice here, okay, we have, let's remind ourselves again, here's ARR. And what we could do is, let's say ARR2 equals ARR. For Python experts out there, you might be concerned with what I've just typed. We'll see in a little bit what the error is. But okay, then what we can do is we can say ARR2, let's go to 5th row, 2nd column, let's set it equal to 6. And now let's look at ARR2. So notice here, there's 6. So my hope now is that when I call toBin on ARR2, it gives me an error. So let's try it. And yep, we get our value error, and it's saying all entries should be 0 or 1. So that's looking good so far, but now I remember I told you there would be something a little bit strange about what I had typed. So I'm going to show you maybe something surprising. So remember, ARR was supposed to be our array that was all good. It was just 0s and 1s. Now what I'm going to do is I'll say toBin ARR. We also get a value error here. What's going on? Let's take a look at ARR. So notice ARR also has a value of 6 here. ARR also got updated. So what's going on? Again, speaking very loosely, I'm not an expert on references in Python by any means, but basically what's going on here is we have ARR and ARR2, and they're referencing the same object. They're referencing the same array. So when we change ARR2, it's changing the object, and ARR also references that same object. So how do we get around this is if we want to be able to change values of 1, we need to make a copy. So what we can do is we can say ARR3, let's let this be ARR2.copy. This makes what's called a shallow copy. You don't need to worry too much about what that is, but if you're familiar with deep versus shallow copy, this is a shallow copy. Then, okay, we have ARR3 equals ARR2.copy. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say ARR3. Let's go to the 6th row. Let's start at the first column, go all the way to the end, but count by 2, and let's set that equal to, let's say, 99. So now let's take a look at ARR3. And we can see here, these values got changed. Now, hopefully, I run ARR2, and it shouldn't have these changes. So we can see here, this ARR2 has its 6, but it didn't change to the 99. So I think this is a good place to stop the video. Thank you so much for watching, and congrats on making it to the end of the NumPy unit.